thank you. Thank you for coming for this late in the afternoon on Saturday. So I appreciate you being here. Yeah, I'm going to approach, I probably am going to repeat some of the things that have been said and done earlier in the conference, but I'm going to approach this from a theoretical point of view a little bit. I mean, to talk about my research and the research that has been done. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, all right, okay. So I'm going to talk about some of the research that's been done, but mostly I'm going to approach this from a practitioner's point of view, from my own teaching experience and the things that I have done in the classroom using art. And as Marta mentioned, I've been a teacher for 15 years. I've taught in South Korea and Thailand, New Zealand, and now here in the UK. So I have had lots of opportunities to use art and kind of to do what I want, a lot of freedom and autonomy to do what I want in the classroom. I taught in a gifted and talented program that was basically formulated around literature and art, using literature and art in the classroom. So experience and examples will come from that. Again, it's been part of my research. My research for my doctoral thesis was on the use of art and project-based learning and creativity in language learning and teaching. So yeah, I'm going to focus a lot, or I'm going to talk a lot about examples from my own experience. So I have some good photos here, as just like Maggie showed from her research. So I'll get started. All right, so this is what I'm going to cover. I'm going to talk about what are the arts exactly. I don't think I need to, to educate this panel on what the arts are, but there's a reason why I will cover that, and why use the arts in language teaching, and then arts as learning material using existing art, how I've used existing art, paintings and things like that to teach English. And mostly I'll be talking about the student-created art, which is mostly what I have done in the classroom with using art. And then at the end, I'll talk about the caveats and the keys for teaching through the arts. So the reason I'm going to give a definition of the arts is because I think when we don't really make the connection, at least I didn't early in my career, and even when I first started trying to use art in the classroom, I didn't really make the connection between the arts and the different types of arts and language learning. So, and many of my friends and colleagues during my doctoral study would make fun of me, like about what I was researching in playfully, of course, but they'd be like, "Oh, you're going to teach English through finger painting," and they even though they had been teachers for a long time, most of them, they didn't really make the connection either. So I think looking at the definition carefully and thinking about the connection between art and language learning is really important, and it really helped me think more about my practice, about how I could use it and how I could integrate it into my teaching practice. So just a couple of definitions here. The arts, also called fine arts, are modes of expression that use skill or imagination in the creation of aesthetic objects, environments, or experiences that can be shared with others. So this is from the Encyclopedia Britannica. When I read this, I was like, yeah, that's like language, right? And this other one from Smashing Magazine, which is like a tech magazine. I really like this definition, so I put it in here. Art is often considered the process or product of deliberately arranging elements in a way that appeals to the senses or emotions. It is generally understood as an activity or product done by people with a communicative or aesthetic purpose, something that expresses an idea, an emotion, or more generally a worldview. So I think the connections, the relevance to language and to language learning is very clear in these definitions. So some of the forms of art that I used in my practice, or some of them I haven't used, but they're just ideas, things that maybe I want to use in the classroom, are drawing and comic books, painting, drama and theater I've used extensively, and I'm going to talk about that. I have an example about that. I won't read this whole list. You can you could just look at this list, but many different ways. I mean, many different forms of art that you can integrate into the classroom. And I've used most of these, many of them in the Gifted and Talented program. And I also taught in the English education, the teacher college at a national university in South Korea, where I was teaching pre-service English education majors, so pre-service EFL teachers. And I used a lot of these while teaching them to show them different ways that they can teach. I've never used calligraphy though. I wonder if anybody has, you can tell me how it went. But you know, I don't think we make jewelry either, but you can try it in the classroom. So I want to actually start out with one example here. I want to talk about a collage project that I did. This was again in South Korea with the class I did for my doctoral research, the class I had for my doctoral research. And so we did a multimedia collage project. And it started with textbook or collage. They did. It looks a lot like a textbook because it is a textbook. And so I had to work with this textbook. The administrator of the school gave me this book, but we had complete freedom in how we did it, and it was an arts-based program. You know, the whole curriculum was based around the arts, but I had to teach them from this book. So this particular unit was about communication, and it gave specific vocabulary that I was supposed to teach them. Not me, the teacher was supposed to teach them. And you can see like some grammar, what is that? The past tense, the irregular past tense verbs. And so we took all of this language, the teacher and I decided how we could incorporate this into some kind of collage project. So this is what we came up with. I'm sorry, you can't see the checklist there. It's a little faint, but in groups of 3 or 4, we asked students to create a story. Then using the key theme of the unit, communication, and the key vocabulary and grammar points of the unit, they created a multimedia collage and gave a presentation on their story. So the unit was talking about facts, different forms of communication, as you'll see in their collage project here. So they had to incorporate all these different kinds of communication, the different grammar points, and the main theme of communication. So what we did is we had them create a story on their collage board. So here is them working on it. The numbers go counterclockwise here. You can see the first thing that they did was plan. So they just did it on the whiteboard. They planned their ideas, and during this time they were so these are middle school students in Korea, probably about intermediate proficiency, or one of them was fairly higher, was probably high intermediate proficiency. She was a very good speaker, but they were so communicative during this project. It was amazing. I think this was maybe the 3rd project they had done, so they had some practice. But they were really engaged and really communicative, sharing their ideas. And then they started to make the project after they planned it. So that's number 2. And then they had to build their story. And so you can see the head of the girl there on the left. So they needed characters in their story. And the story was about a girl inviting people to her birthday party through different forms of communication. And then number 4, you can see they're giving a presentation on it. I'm not sure where the 3rd student was in this group. Maybe they were absent that day. But anyway, they gave a presentation on it. And here is what the final product looked like if you can't see it. So you can see all the different ways that they incorporated the themes of the unit, the theme of the unit of communication, the key vocabulary, the grammar, and they had a lot of fun doing it. And the 2 people that they painted on either end are the characters that they incorporated into the story. Something about a girl inviting a shy boy to her birthday party or something like that. But anyway, it was really fun, and lots of humor, lots of use of humor, lots of speaking. They were very engaged throughout the whole project. So that's just one example. I'm going to give more as we go on, but I want to talk about why use the arts in language teaching. I think this has probably been repeated several times throughout the course of the conference, but I'll say it again. I don't normally put this much text on a slide. I'm sorry about that. The long quote here, but I couldn't say it better, and I really like this quote a lot. So I just highlighted in yellow the kind of the key elements of this quote. So the author, Ruiz, this study of using art in New York City schools for immigrant children. He says, by integrating the arts and art making into English language teaching and learning, students will develop and deepen their understanding of their own and others' human experience. And I believe that's true. I saw that whenever I use art in the classroom. Going on, he says, arts can open doors for high levels of analysis and also challenge students to explore themselves and their surroundings. I believe that's also true. The arts convey what it means to be human, challenge the intellect, and provide rich experiences in analysis, exploration, reflection, observation, imagination, experimentation, both with the art itself and with the language as they're producing it, and communication. So I really like this quote. I think this says a lot. So by placing art within the context of the lives of English language learners and enabling them to express their ideas visually, as well as by speaking and writing, teachers can build on prior knowledge, students' own cultural knowledge, using things that they know about their culture, and then building on that, or just whatever they know or whatever they're interested in. The teacher can incorporate that into their project, it's good when you can incorporate, get a feel of what students know and what students are interested in, and you have the freedom to incorporate that into the arts projects. It can create a bridge between written and spoken language, the language that they have produced, or even just short writing assignments, or even the comprehension type questions that they either fill in the blank or write, and then finding ways through the arts to have them produce that through communication. It makes learning relevant and meaningful. It helps students develop self-esteem, and I think this is an important one that I notice, especially with the gifted and talented students. I think the arts can build new pathways of expression, and it provides a vehicle for self-expression. And art is engaging, but it can also be cathartic, right? And when the student's voice and their interest is heard and understood by others, I think this really helps them feel unique, and that their uniqueness is valued. So I really believe strongly that the art projects that with all levels of students that I've used the arts with, it help build their self-esteem. Of course, it fosters creativity and higher order thinking skills, promotes high levels of analysis, reasoning, and questioning through many of these projects. One example that I don't have here is I had students in my research class. They had to create a brochure, like a marketing brochure for a school that they imagined, their dream school. And during that project, there was so much like question posing and how are we going to do this? What are the different ways that we can show this element of our dream school? So definitely it promotes question posing. It models and promotes problem solving. It emphasizes interpreting and the communication of ideas, and it enhances students' way of observing, responding to, and representing the world. It gives them lots of different opportunities, especially if you're, not just doing one art project, but you're giving them, different modes of expression through the arts, different forms of art for them to express their ideas and different ways to represent their world. Here are some of the additional benefits of incorporating arts activities. It can be a change of pace, although I use this one hesitantly, because I think when you use art or arts projects just kind of randomly and sporadically, it sort of signals to students that it's just a fun escape from learning, that it's not learning itself, that it's like a break from learning. Oh, we're going to do some drawing now, or, we're going to do a little drama project or something. Okay, this will be good for a change. But I think that's not good, because then they don't value it and they see it as like a break. Definitely that's not good. But when it's continuous and it's, incorporated throughout the unit or throughout the semester, and they know that it's coming, it's built into the curriculum, then they can look forward to it, and it can be a good change of pace from doing, I don't know, test prep or other, more textbook focused learning. And it's a different way to understand communication. I think this is an important point as well. I think students see language as being rule-based and classroom teaching as being content-based, but the arts, and especially drama, in my opinion, is performative. And I think when they perform language, or when they're using language in a meaningful way, they understand it as the vehicle of not just the vehicle of learning, but also the point of learning, the object of learning. I'm sorry, they don't see it just as the object of learning, they also see it as the vehicle of learning. And so they understand the importance of communication in the classroom. I think it's also motivating and empowering, and I've certainly witnessed this all the times that I've used it in the classroom. At first, I think students are hesitant and they're scared, to do art, or they're like, I'm not a good painter, or I'm not good at, being creative in general, doing a storyboard or a comic book or something like that. But once they start using it, they really get into it. Once they start doing it, and they become engaged, I can see how it's motivating for them. It's also culturally enriching, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Of course, it enhances creativity, makes students think in different ways. Again, if you have like certain requirements or other kinds of constraints, like, for example, some of the writing assignments I give, they have to rhyme, right? So that creates a constraint, and it makes them have to be more innovative with the language that they use. I think any kind of art is going to enhance creativity. It enhances collaboration, especially when students are working, not just in a group, but as a group. You have to kind of teach them how to work as a group. But once they start working together and they start building off of each other's ideas, it becomes highly collaborative. And in my research study, and even with the pre-service teachers that I taught, they said they really enjoyed that interaction with their classmates and bouncing ideas off of each other and working together to build the product. Students can express personal reactions and feelings about what they've made, or about art that's already been made. But what about language? So none of this really has specifically to do with language. So here are some key points, I think, the ways that it benefits language learning. It can invoke language exploration, and it always does. Not only students trying to use the key language from the unit in new ways, or to try to incorporate it into their project, sort of to check a box, but they want to say what they want to say, but they don't know how. So they have to go and find out how to do it, whether it's using a dictionary or asking somebody else. A lot of students just ask the teacher, how do you say this? How do you say this in English? So because they were so engaged, and because they wanted to express themselves fully and meaningfully, they went far beyond the textbook, which is the next thing. Language use beyond the classroom, not just beyond the textbook, but things that you normally don't do in the classroom, like humor, incorporating humor, lots of that in their projects. Language play, colloquialisms and slang, they incorporated all of these things into their projects. The subjectivity of art can stimulate deep discussion. So especially when using existing art, which I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes, they will talk, very, very deeply about the meaning of a piece of art, or, how it represents their culture or something like that. When creating art, language and linguistic concepts become tangible. I'm going to give a few examples about that, but you can think for something like still life, to teach prepositions or something like that. They can see it very clearly. And art is more interesting than, the way that they teach prepositions in textbooks, in my opinion. But there are many ways that linguistic concepts can be represented, through using art, and how different ways that it can be made tangible. Linguistic concepts can be made tangible through art. There's an enormous variety of language that can be incorporated into arts-based projects. So for the next example, I want to look at these last two here, how language and linguistic concepts can become tangible and the variety of language that can be incorporated into a project. So this is a project that I did with the pre-service English education majors, like I said, in a national university in South Korea. So I had them design a game. Most of them did a board game because I think it was easier, but there was one group of boys that did a computer game. One of them has some software developing knowledge, so they did a computer game, but it was kind of basic. But this board game was immaculate and amazing, and they were really engaged throughout the project. So I like to use this as an example. So some of the key language that they had to incorporate into this project was language related to buildings in the city, the different types of buildings, language related to directions, imperatives, giving commands. So that's what the playing cards did. All the playing cards were the imperative sentences, the commands. They had to use 7 to 10 pre-assigned idioms. So that's why all these buildings say shall, seek and ye shall find, and in these different blocks, they incorporated other English idioms. So they just selected these idioms out of a hat, and then they had to somehow put them into their board game. And then language related to how-to writing, giving instructions and sequencing and things like that. So they had to teach, they developed the board game, then they had to teach their classmates how to play it. So lots of language that was built into this. And you know, they found ways to make, like groups found ways to make the idioms, you know, to kind of visually represent the idioms. So giving, like I said, making tangible these linguistic concepts. So some of the ways that I've used art, I haven't done this in a while, but kind of this is how I started out using art in the classroom, just by using existing art. So here's some ideas for using existing art. And reasons why, I guess. Visual elements assist in early language learning. You can think about cue cards, right, when we're teaching beginner level students, but art is far more interesting and engaging and you know, thought-provoking than cue cards. So you can find ways to use art, you know, especially with beginner level. So one of the things that I always get asked when I talk about this and I talk about my research is, you know, this seems like it's for advanced level students because they have to communicate about art, but I don't think that's true. I've used it with like 6-year-olds, used art in the classroom with 6-year-olds, and they loved it. They enjoyed it a lot. So I think it works with all levels of students. It encourages vocabulary exploration. It stimulates creativity and the creative exploration of language, as I mentioned before. Grants access to culture. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. It allows for abstraction, meaning that you're dealing with ideas rather than events, or rather than like the textbook content or something like that. The focus becomes on connecting ideas and concepts. It can facilitate the use of vivid emotional and of metaphorical language use, particularly with higher level students. And language is multimodal and should be learning should be multimodal as well. Oops. I've used this in many different classrooms with young children. Just, I don't think I use these exact paintings, but just using paintings and having students talk about paintings. What did they notice about them? And then using them to talk about culture. So art, I believe that art is the perfect place to start a conversation about culture. We can learn a lot about a group of people by studying their art. Encourage students to share a classic piece of art. This is what I've done is students can choose a piece of art and they can bring it in and they can talk about how it represents their culture or what they think about it, what they believe that it was trying to express. Thomas Wolfe said, culture is the arts elevated to a set of beliefs. So certainly there's no doubt that culture is an important part of, that art is an important part of culture and a good way to learn about culture. So I put here, culture is as embedded in language as it is in art. Ask students to draw connections between the art in their culture and their language, such as certain idioms or figurative language or other aspects of the language. understand visual arts forms of language and vice versa. Different things that I have done in the classroom. Another project that I like to do is to take photos, or photos that I find from the internet, or sometimes photos that I took myself. Or the best thing to do is ask students to take photos, to take 1 or 2 photos during the day, or during the week, and then bring them to class, and then you put them in an arrangement, a collage, and then they have to write a story using a mixture of each other's photos. So this is something I've done a lot, and I always enjoy it. Always get amazing creative stories. I think this has probably been mentioned. This is an obvious one and kind of a typical one, just taking comic books and having them make their own story using the pictures. Again, I think this is better for beginners, but it can be used for all levels. Of course, you're going to differentiate by language, or differentiate by level, the language that you expect. But this is a common activity. I think having them, fill in the bubbles and try to be funny, and I usually have them do it in groups, so it becomes collaborative as well. Another thing I like to do is take a piece of really weird abstract art. I don't know if this is weird or not, but just take a piece of abstract art and have them create a story or say what they see in it, kind of use it as like a Rorschach test sort of thing, and just have them explain what it means, what they think it means. Again, this is probably better for intermediate to advanced level students, but beginner students can probably say basic things that they see in it, like maybe the sea or fish or something like that. But this is good for bringing out the subjectivity of interpretation and having students talk about their ideas and debate what they see, and it's always quite funny to have them do this. Sometimes I ask them to make a story from it, or to create a title for it or something like that. So they always enjoy this type of activity. But mostly what I have done, and what I'm going to talk about now, is having the students themselves create the art. So I guess it depends on the resources that you have, and the time that you have, and how much time you have to train teachers and stuff like that, how you use art, whether you use existing pieces of art or whether you have students actually engage in art making practices in the classroom. But it's what I prefer, and what I did for, like I said, for the Gifted and Talented program, and what I have done with my research, with most of my research since, is having students create art in the classroom. I think it's probably what most people have talked about in this conference. So why have students create art? Because it's experiential, hands-on learning. It's engaging and fun. As I said before, there's built-in differentiation. Lower level students, beginners, they're going to use more basic language, more less complex grammatical constructions, but that's okay, So, and if there's a mixed level group, then that's great too. Students at lower level proficiency can learn from the higher level proficiency students, and the higher proficiency students can teach, basically trying to guide the lower level students through the project. But I always see that without having to say, when you do regular materials, you have to create multiple handouts or use different textbooks usually. But with art, when you're using arts, differentiation is built in. They're going to produce the language that they're able to produce, and hopefully there's scaffolding on the part of the teacher, and like I said, other people in the group that can help the lower proficiency students. It is collaborative and interactive. This was a major focus of my doctoral research, is how arts or arts-based projects can facilitate collaboration and communication and interaction in the classroom. And from my experience, using art is always collaborative, far more collaborative than just having them do some jigsaw activity or something like that. Again, as I mentioned before, I said I was going to come back to this, the visualization of linguistic concepts. So you can see how a still life, you might teach prepositions, or you might teach intensifiers or modifiers. For the 1940 to 2016 photo, you can talk about past tense and present tense, although they're both in the past, I guess. But or you can maybe show a futuristic city to talk about past, and then you can kind of move them through the different verb tenses along the continuum, and maybe have them talk about past progressive and then present progressive tense, and you know, have them use different verb tenses to talk about how things have changed. You know, with the kind of blank photo here with the boat, you can have, there's many different things you can do. You can have them talk about distance, things in relation to others. You know, you can certainly, again, talk about prepositions. You can have them add in more elements to draw in other things for vocabulary building, many different things that you can do. So I think that it's great for making the helping students to visualize language and to make it, you know, have them create an image of these different linguistic concepts as they learn them. It encourages question posing. There's a tendency towards the narrative, which again I'll talk about in a minute. Meaning they're talking about, you know, a story. They're making a story. They're talking about their own lives or the lives of characters that they have created. And in that same vein, it connects personal experiences and interests to the language. So here's a picture of a child drawing their family, and, you know, whatever their interests are, you know, whether it's I remember I had a group of boys that created I don't know, some kind of violent computer game was popular in Korea at the time, and they created like a comic story that was quite violent. You know, I had to regulate it a little bit, but they enjoyed it immensely and were laughing through the whole thing. And so they were really into this computer game. So they were kind of incorporating this computer game into their story, into what they had to do. So whatever students are interested in, they can incorporate it into their project. Iteration is embedded with textbooks and with handouts. It's like the objective is to finish and then go on to the next page, or then for the teacher to check it and then to tell you if it's correct or not. There's not a lot of going back, of review, or maybe just before a test or something, but there's not a lot of iteration. But in art, there is. You could see in the collage project, they had to go back and, you know, kind of remake their story, and they had to add different elements, and they screwed up on the painting, and then they had to debate about how they were going to fix it. And then in the process of fixing it, they decided to incorporate more language and more forms of communication. So that type of iteration, I don't think would have came about in a kind of a traditional mode of teaching. And repetition in copying is rare. So the projects that the groups are creating, even though they're all working with the same basic theme and the same language points and the same grammatical concepts, all their stories and all the things that they produced, each group is dramatically different. And then constraints, you know, like these different requirements they have to do, or having them say it has to rhyme, or, you know, having them do like limericks or haikus if they're going to write poetry. Adding in these different constraints can help facilitate more original language use. So just to go through a couple of projects that I've had students do. Again, this project was with the teachers, the pre-service English education teachers. And I wanted them to design their ideal classroom. And again, we could have just talked about this, or we could have, you know, I could have given them an article about classroom and classroom design, but I wanted them to design their own and they actually used an architectural CAD tool to do this. So, and it was difficult at first, but I think they had a lot of fun with it. They complained a lot at points, but I think in the end they really enjoyed using that tool and then coming up with their designs. So I told them they had to focus on tell me the three most important things, and so here they are at the top, and then at the bottom here is the CAD rendering of their ideal classroom. And then they had to, again, obviously they had to speak English throughout the whole project, and then they had to present it. And their ideas were really fascinating. but their conversations throughout the process were amazing, and lots of debate, lots of arguing, which was great. It stimulated, obviously that stimulates more creativity. Storyboarding, I think Maggie may have mentioned this a little while ago. I've had, this isn't a project that the students actually did. I just took this picture from the internet, but I don't have pictures of the projects that I did, but I have used storyboarding quite frequently in my classes. And I think storyboarding is a great activity because it does all these different things from the list that I showed earlier. There's built-in differentiation when they do storyboarding. So storyboarding is like either they're writing a story, a book, or maybe they're planning to do a mini drama, or they're, you know, part of their story for a different art project. Maybe it's, I mean, a different mode of art, like a painting. They'll do a painting and then they have to tell the story about it. So I often have students do a storyboard at the beginning of a project. And as I said, there's built-in differentiation. It's collaborative and inherently interactive. The visualization of linguistic concepts, again, you can imagine how they use prepositions and how they use sequencing words when they're planning the plot of their drama or whatever it is. Moods, you know, they have to talk about, ask questions, so the interrogative mood, and the imperative mood when they're giving each other commands. So we can bring those after they have finished the storyboards. We can bring those grammatical moods into the discussion, how they use them. Certainly, there's a tendency towards the narrative. Connects personal experiences and interests to the language. They always put in their story the things that interest them. Iteration is embedded, of course. Repetition doesn't happen, or copying. What I mean by repetition is, like, if you're having students make sentences, from my experience, especially young students, when you call on the next student, he'll often repeat or just change one word of what the previous student said, and then the next student will do this thing, they repeat or just change, like maybe the verb or the place or something. But that doesn't happen in art. You know, they're totally different when you're using different forms of art. And then constraints can facilitate more original language use. So you can tell them things that they can do, things that they can't do, things that they must do, certain requirements, certain things to prohibit that you don't let them use. So if you want them to not use happy or good or bad, you could tell them you can't use these basic vocabulary words, so that they have to explore more difficult adjectives. And what about grammar? I always get this question when I talk about using art in language class. So what about grammar? So I have to say that this was not my idea. I have used this frequently, but this was my colleague's idea, my co-teacher's idea in the Gifted and Talented program, the director of the program, actually. The school said we had to teach them some grammar. And so he came up with this brilliant idea, which I absolutely love. I don't have any pictures of it though, but oops, I'm going the wrong way here. But we had them do grammar mosaics, right? So he brought in these shiny pieces of tile, and we gave them some sample sentences, and then they had to make, I think, 5 or 6 of their own sentences. And then they had to, based on these, each color of the tiles represented a different part of speech: adverbs, articles, nouns, verbs, and prepositions. And then, you know, they had to write their own sentences. We had them write their sentences before we gave them the tiles, before they knew what was going on. And then they had to arrange the tiles according to, you know, their sentences that they made, the sample sentences that we gave them. And in the end, they had these beautiful, amazing mosaics. And again, this is the visualization of linguistic concepts. And we asked them, you know, what do you notice about prepositions? Because in Korean, there are postpositions, and this confuses students. They come after the noun that they're modifying. So we asked them, you know, what do you notice about the prepositions? What do you notice about the placement of adverbs? They can go before or after the verb that they're modifying, at the beginning of the sentence, at the end of the sentence. It's kind of the same rule as Korean with adverbs. So we just asked them about, you know, to kind of analyze their mosaic and to tell us what grammar points they learned by looking at it. And drama is something that I almost always try to do in every classroom. I've done it with university students. I've done it with, of course, with younger students who acted out, you know, some fairy tale or something. And I've done it with older people who were like who wanted to learn English to travel. So we acted out, we had to have them act out different scenarios. But the hardest was, or the scariest, I guess, was having to do it with middle school students. And I did. And they loved it. Actually, it went really well. There was at first there was like one boy who was, you know, too cool for school, but he got into it at the end. And this required planning, preparing, you know, practicing, and a lot of iteration. You know, revising their script, giving each other commands, asking each other questions about what they should do, what they shouldn't do, what props they should have, what backgrounds they're going to need. So, you know, they debated and discussed all of these. So I think drama is just an amazing way to teach. And it also promoted teacher immediacy behaviors. You know, the teacher was really engaged with their drama project. In most of the groups, this is just one group, but most of the groups wanted the teacher to play some part. So here in this picture, the teacher is playing the taxi driver in their family trip play. So, but the teacher, having the teacher, you know, be part of not only the drama but the preparation for it. You know, they would ask, what do you think about this idea? And the teacher was extremely engaged and helpful in helping them write their script and plan. And like I said, I think this really motivated students, this teacher immediacy behavior, feeling that the teacher is actually part of the group, was really motivating and encouraging for them. So just a few caveats to end on. Well, I won't end on the negative. I have one more slide after this, but some of the caveats for teachers. Yeah, I know finding time in a preset curriculum is difficult. You know, most teachers don't have this much freedom to spend 3 or 4 weeks on a drama project. So I guess the teacher has to be creative in you know, a problem solver as well, to figure out how they're going to incorporate this into the classroom. What I did is had students, several parts of their project are for homework, like the brainstorming was homework, and then they came to class and then they discussed their different ideas that they brainstormed. And then they had to go home and talk about what they want to revise. Once they started making the project, they had to go home, write a list of things that they want to revise, and then they would come to class and they would discuss their possible revisions, and then decide which ones to change, what to change and what not to change. But it's difficult. It's time consuming. Art projects can be time consuming. And I know teachers have to get through a set curriculum, you know, you have to teach them this. So it's challenging for teachers for sure. Art projects and presentations, especially, you know, things like that are subjective, like paintings and drama, and I guess all arts are subjective, right? It can be difficult to assess. So the teacher has to create very clear criteria, and communicate the criteria in a way that doesn't make students do the project so that they're checking off boxes, just to strip the creativity out from it. So it's tricky on how a teacher is going to assess the final product, you know, the art that students have been creating. Resources might be unavailable. I wanted to paint in one of my classes, and I couldn't source paint for a good price when I was doing my doctoral research, or the canvases to do the painting. Or I could only get like small ones or something. Sometimes some of the projects the administrator didn't really want me doing. So resources might be unavailable. It requires preparation, creativity, and skill on behalf of the teacher. The classroom dynamics and the space, there might be space issues if you work in a small classroom. For students, proficiency level limitations for sure, but again, I think it's for all levels. Students may not see the point or even like art, so before you begin, I think it's important that you sell the students, or you get students to buy into the idea of art, and articulate to the students why it's beneficial, how it can help them learn language, the connection, the relationship between arts and language learning and language use, and just really convince them, I guess. You know, you got to get this, you got to make it clear to the students at the beginning why you're teaching in this way and how they're going to benefit from it, or else they're just like, why are we painting? You know, why are we doing this and not just checking boxes in the textbook? Some art might be too personal. Sometimes students don't want to integrate their own feelings and beliefs and opinions. They feel they don't want those to be known. So you got to allow freedom. You know, if they don't want to do that, then they can just do something. If they don't want to share their interest or their family, something about their family through their art, you know, you got to give them an alternative, a different thing that they can produce. It can be disruptive, and it was very disruptive. My classes, especially with the gifted and talented students, was very loud. They were very loud. They were running around. We had some back and forth with administration about you know, how much noise they were making, because they were really engaged and they were really having fun with it. So it can be disruptive. So there needs to be a certain, you know, agreement with the teacher of, you know, what's expected of students, and, you know, the noise level that they can make while they're doing the projects. Students may become, and I mentioned this earlier, students could be more concerned about artistic ability or lack thereof than the language points of the lesson or the project. So yeah, I've had both. I've had a student that was really good at art, and they wouldn't let anybody else touch their drawing, and so they were really, you know, focused on drawing these cartoons, and if anybody screwed it up, they were really angry, and they took way too long to do it. And then I've had students who are like, I'm not good at drawing, so I'm not going to do it. And then you just have to encourage them. All right, and I want to end on the positive. The keys for teaching through the arts: allow time for students to acclimate. As I said, don't give up after one try. You know, students are going to be skeptical at first, and you're going to have to convince them and show them why it's fun, and kind of let them see for themselves how engaging it can be. So the first project didn't go well in my research project. The second one went better. By the third one, they had it, and they were loving it. Explain the purpose and benefits, help students buy in, as I've already mentioned. Continuously draw parallels between language and art. They're simple systems. They communicate ideas and feelings. There are conventions in art with freedom, just like language. There's grammar, but there's freedom for expression. That it's culturally embedded, creative production, voice and choice. You know, constantly make students understand these parallels, these similarities. Use art to inspire language use. Get students to go beyond the requirements and beyond the language in the textbook and want to explore. Give them, you know, different channels and different ways to explore language and to express themselves through the art that they're creating. Don't overcorrect too much or give too much feedback during the process. Just give them, you know, guide them along, and then at the end of the project, before they present, you can help them with the grammar or some other language points or something like that. But I found like the teacher was giving too much feedback in my research study, and it was really inhibiting what students were doing in the classroom. Use lesson themes and emphasize that art, like language learning, is process oriented. So there's iteration, as I've said several times, and it's a process. They have to go through the different stages before it's fully developed, and they're going to improve along the way. They're going to improve their language, and they're going to improve their art project. And allow time for students to present their work. Always allow time to present their work and highlight and reflect on what was learned. So in my project, I always had them write an essay about what they thought they did well and what they contributed and what they liked about their art project. And then we talked about that in class. And this was after the presentation. So they gave the presentation, and then they wrote an essay to reflect on what they did. And then we had a session where we shared ideas about each other's art projects. That was the last thing that we did. So I think this is very important. If the students create it, they have to present it. Don't just have them make something and be like, okay, that was great. Let's go on to the next unit. Of course, they have to present it and of course, they have to reflect on what they did and how it helped them. And I think one of the most important points to make is as a teacher, ask not how can I teach with art, but rather how can students learn through art? How can I facilitate learning through art? And I think this is a very important distinction. Like I said, I always get questions about, you know, how am I going to test? What criteria should I use? You know, how do I teach this thing or that thing through art? And I think I think many teachers have taken the wrong perspective about how you sort of like impose art onto the students and how you can use it as a different mode of teaching, like rather than the textbook, you can teach through this piece of art. I think it's more important to ask, you know, how can students learn? What are the different ways that I can facilitate, that I can set up a project so that students have a lot of freedom and it's meaningful and they have their own, they have their choice and they have a lot of autonomy. And how can I encourage different behaviors through different art projects? And you know, most importantly, how are the what kind of learning environment is this going to create, and how is it going to help students engage through art? Thank you.